Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Ohio Wesleyan University, where she studied ancient Greek. Years later, she earned a Master's of Sciences in Nursing from Ohio State University. Years later still, she earned a Master of Fine Arts in Creative Nonfiction from Ashland University. She lives and writes in Ohio in a house she and her husband built out of discarded things, and a psychiatric nurse practitioner since 2008. She operates a solo mental health practice where she does everything from cleaning the toilet to writing prescriptions. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Amanda Irene Rush.
Thank you, Julia, for having me. This is quite a delight for me. I appreciate the invite.
Well, Amanda, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
And, it's just in one word, Julia, timing. It's just timing. I started working on a book thinking that I could publish an actual book in 2009. I had just become a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and I had always written, I had written short stories and essays. By that time I had one published. But it was when I started working as a psych nurse practitioner in a community mental health center that I started to think, wow, this would make a great memoir, And so for the 4 years that I worked at that agency, I diligently wrote notes and worked on these essays with this idea of having a collection of essays that would recount my first 4 years as a psychiatric nurse practitioner. And so then in 2015, I took my manuscript up to Ashland University. They used to have a nonfiction conference called River Teeth. And you could go there and then you could pay a little extra to have an editor review your manuscript. So I did that. And he told me that it was not a collection of essays. It needed to be a memoir. And I should focus more on my relationship with my mother, who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia when I was young, and be more about like my childhood and weave it in with my experiences as an NP. Of course, I had no idea what he meant by memoir. I guess I had read memoirs, but I didn't know how to write one. So a friend of mine and fellow NP happened to be at Ashland University working on her MFA in creative writing, and she talked me into doing the same. So I entered the program, I believe in 2016, with the intention of I'm going to take this collection of essays and I'm going to somehow turn it into a memoir. And what happened as I started to revise is all this family stuff kept coming up. And all this, not just family stuff, but all this stuff that was very worn and one-sided and one-dimensional, like all these old stories I'd been telling myself about my mother and my father and my childhood. And I thought, this just isn't very interesting or nuanced. And there has to be something deeper and more true than this. Surely I'm more mature than what I thought when I was 20, And so long story short, I spent a lot of time in the program, working on the thesis. And what happened was I just sort of Frankensteined my, like, part of my original manuscript of becoming an nurse practitioner and my family stuff. And then it was after I graduated that I took the time to just focus on the family narrative and the childhood narrative. And I spent another, let's see, what was that, 2 or 3 years transforming the thesis into the memoir that it is today. So if I could have done that faster, I would have, but it just took time, and life gets in the way, and you have to figure out what wants to be written too, is what I experienced. So timing.
Isn't it amazing how when we begin writing, all of those childhood memories and all those issues with our parents and trying to think of them as humans instead of just mother and father, and then it really is a healing process. It's like therapy when you start writing. So we start healing ourselves for all of those issues as well.
Very much so. Yeah, I will say that, yeah, the writing of the memoir was very healing indeed. It really gave me the opportunity to look at all the old narratives in a new way, and to look at things from different perspectives, and to just have a much deeper appreciation for the choices that my parents made, realizing that they did the best they could with what, the circumstances they found themselves in. And also, giving myself some grace too. I was pretty hard on myself as well. And so even though it's still not the happiest of stories, I like to think that there's some grace that, that came out of relooking at all of the stories and all the artifacts, and all the remains, that were left behind.
And you're going to have so many people reaching out to you who have similar stories and say how your story has touched them and helped them in some way, because we all have those same stories in our families. We've just kept them hidden for so long. And that's one thing about memoir, is that some of the family secrets come out. And sometimes our family members who are left are not so pleased with us. Have you found any of that in your family?
Yes, I have. Now, I would not have been able to even write this memoir if my parents were still alive, if my stepmother were still alive, my grandparents were still alive. But I do still have people alive. In particular, I have a sister. And even though everything I wrote about are things that we have talked about a million times, and there were really no secrets divulged at all, I think that when she read the thesis version, she has not read the book, and I don't think she will. But when she read the thesis version, she told me that it was very upsetting. And I think it was because it's one thing to talk about it with your sister late at night, but it's another thing to see it so stark on the page, and all the painful family dynamics, all the sadness and all the just the yuck and the ick that, comes with these things. I think it was a little much for her. And no one else in my family has read it. I have, a strange stepfather, and I have an aunt and an uncle, and my niece and my nephew who are adults, and no one else in my family has read the book. I shouldn't say no one else, because even my sister hasn't read the book. So no one in my family that I know of has read the book. But to go back to, there are people who hopefully will be helped, by the book's message. I had one woman I met at a library reading. It was my little local library in Mechanicsburg, Ohio. And I had about 5 people in the audience. And one of the ladies bought 2 copies while she was there for her and her sister. And then about 3 months later, she contacted me and said, can I come by and buy 3 more copies? I want to give them to my other family members for Christmas because they need to read this book. And that meant more to me than anything else. That was really special.
That's been my favorite part of writing a book is those people who reach out to you, and most of us are not going to become, famous for our books. But I think if you touch one other person's lives, touch their hearts or touch their souls, and with your story, then what we've lived through has not been in vain. And I just think that you're going to find that more and more. And hopefully your sister will realize that this is your perspective. This is what you remember. These are your memories, and it's your story to tell. And it is healing for you. So I think that's what's most important about putting our words on paper.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The title is so interesting. What does the title mean? The Gathering Girl.
So The Gathering Girl comes from when I started out writing the memoir, or I should say the thesis at the time. I knew I couldn't write it straight because, like I said, when I sat down to write, all that came out were all these old narratives, like, oh, my father drank too much and my mother was a crazy living ghost and no one ever wanted me and my sister. We were abandoned and left alone. And so I thought, well, how could I get into this story in a different way? And I have always, well, since college, I doodled. And I say doodle because I can't draw. When I start to draw on purpose, it's just horrible. I have no talent. But if I doodle, I just sort of let my subconscious take over. And what comes across, what comes out is usually really interesting and artistic and, and surprising. And as I was gathering the things to examine, if you will, to help me get into the story and tell it in a different way, the photographs and the letters and documents and my father's journals, my mother's journals, I also gathered some of my doodles to see if any of those could sort of speak to me. And one of them did. It was a doodle of a girl gathering apples that I drew about, I think, a month after my mother died. And for some reason, she just struck me. And she just seemed to call out, you have, your task right now in life is to gather all these things and to examine them, re-examine them, and tell a different story. Because the story you've been telling yourself is not healthy or healing for anybody. And you're getting older and you need a story that you can move forward with and from. And so that's where the Gathering Girl came from, because that's what I named the girl in the doodle. And the cover of the book is actually a rendering of my original doodle, which is in the book. So that's why there's that tree on the cover with the apples. And so in the doodle, there's the actual girl in there as well. So that's where the Gathering Girl comes from.
I've always heard that people go into psychiatry to figure out their own lives and to figure out, their own issues. So maybe that's why you ended up in this field.
Well, that's certainly part of it. Yeah, that. And, when I got divorced in 2004, I needed a way to feed myself. And I lived on Ohio State campus and they had a great nursing program. And I thought, oh, well, it's right in my backyard. Oh, and I can go into psychiatric nursing, even better. Maybe I can figure some things out and, make some amends to my mother who, that was one of the narratives I had carried, that I didn't treat her well. I didn't understand her illness. I blamed her for it. I sort of wrote her off. So, yeah, I'm sure I don't believe anything happens by chance, really. I think I was pretty fated to become a psychiatric nurse practitioner.
Well, you certainly have a rich environment these days. We have so many people with mental illness, and we don't know what to do with them. And so a lot of them end up on the street and our homeless population.
Certainly. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, once you finished this manuscript, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to choose a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
So I did not look for an agent. I found that task very daunting. I mean, the whole task of publishing period was daunting. And I thought I'll just try. And I knew I probably wasn't going to, be picked up even with an agent by one of the big traditional, like super traditional publishers, because it's a very quiet memoir. There's nothing sensational about it. I'm not famous. So what I did was I just looked at small literary presses and university presses. And I sent the manuscript out, or a query letter, or a book proposal, whichever they wanted. And I probably submitted to about 15 different places. And it was after, I think, my 8th no. And I started to look at the clock and I'm like, okay, I'm almost 50. And I'd always had a goal. I wanted to have a book in the world by the time I was 50, or at least in my 50th year. This was my goal. I've never had children. I'm not going to have children. Like, my first book, I considered like my baby, and it was a goal. So I met a woman through some various channels who has a hybrid publishing press out of Minneapolis, and it's owned by women, and it's only for women. It only publishes books by women. And she considers it assistive, I hope I get this right, assisted self-publishing. So I contracted with her in the fall of 22, and they were wonderful. I retained all the artistic control, but she did encourage me to trust her and her staff's professional opinions. So, like, with the cover, I had input, but she had a designer to really bring it to light. It went through, it had already gone through a lot of professional editing before I even got to her, but she had the developmental editing and the copy editor and the proofreading and all of that. So I was pretty happy with the process. And I liked that I was able to retain a lot of the control. I didn't want anyone changing the title, or changing the story, telling me I had to do this or do that. So that was a good part of it. Yeah. Would I have loved to have been traditionally published by a university press? I won't lie. I had my dreams of, Nebraska or Ohio State picking it up, and, but I just, I wanted it when I wanted it, and I was able to do it. And I honestly, it would still be unpublished. It's not easy to be traditionally published in this day and age. So.
No, and that's a normal story for most of us after a certain age, especially. And I'm told that 2 million titles published in the U.S. every year. So, just finding our way into the publishing world and being able to get our work out there, it's going to far outlive us. It's going to be in libraries and on bookshelves long after we're gone. And that's just such a legacy. I think it's such a legacy. I love that one of my granddaughters chose one of my books to be her book report that she had to do in class. And she looked at me and she said, not everybody's grandmother writes a book. And so I was just so pleased. That's part of the legacy.
Oh, absolutely. And, at the end of the day, while I harbor fantasies of being famous and being interviewed by Oprah and NPR and, all those other things. At the end of the day, as a lover of words, a reader, a writer, I just want to be part of that larger conversation. And now I am, at least my little book is out in the world and will find her way. And I love that. I love the idea of that, that I was able to contribute to that bigger, that big sea of books that are out there.
Yes, and to the conversation. And that book is now your calling card and goes hand in hand with your profession as well.
Absolutely.
And I love small presses. I'm published by a small press, and I think you just receive so much more attention. We do always think we're going to be picked up by one of the big five, but I've been told when I've interviewed authors with the big five that, you get very little attention. You get about 2% of the proceeds. If you ever earn out I think it's down to $1,000 now for the
Right.
money that they give you up front. But unless you're a celebrity, you're not probably going to do very well with them. And we also have to do all the legwork. We have to take all the challenges with publicity and marketing, even if you're with the big five. So let's talk about publicity. Or are you finding anything that works for you, or maybe something you've tried that doesn't work in promoting your book?
When it came out, or when I announced it officially to the world in April of last year, I was so gung-ho on the marketing. And I was like, I got to hustle, hustle, hustle. No one's going to do this for me. And I just, really took off, and I threw myself a book party in Columbus, and the publisher threw me one in Minneapolis. And I started a writer's Facebook page, and I hired my niece to help me brand myself. And I chose my colors and my fonts, and I revamped my website. And I started a newsletter with a mailing list, and I, would send out little things, every couple of weeks. And I would reach out to people. Hey, can I be on this podcast? Hey, are you looking for this? Or, can I come speak here? And I think I just really burned myself out. And by midsummer, the idea of promoting the book and marketing the book just made me want to crawl in a hole and never come out. And I'm not sure I've come out of that hole yet, And I think part of it was when you mentioned 2 million books, I read a statistic that it was 4 million. And that just floored me. And I thought, okay, why am I expending all of this time, money, and energy to try to get my humble little memoir in, like, it's just, it just seemed so overwhelming and futile. And so I just I reminded myself what my original priority was. And then I just pivoted and thought, you know what, I've done my work and it's out there, and I will just slowly take opportunities as they come. And I don't need to push up against this, this idea that if I just promote and market that, what's my end goal? I'm going to make $1 million. It's just not realistic. So I just kind of do quiet things, every now and again. Somebody will mention the book and say, hey, we'd like to, can I buy a copy? Or I have this book club, or I have a nurse practitioner colleague who's starting a outpatient group therapy. And hopefully by summer, I'll be doing a group on like narrative therapy, for lack of a better term. That's, I guess, the closest to what it is, helping people re-examine their life narratives, in a way to heal. And so I'm just sort of just trying to be slow and steady about it and not so hyper. And I try not to look on Facebook too much. Do you want to promote your book and sell 1 million copies? And No, I don't. I just, really, I just want to write the next one. That's what, this one's done. It's out there. Trying to focus on just writing the next one. Yeah.
Have you started another book?
I have, yes. It is an account of the last 2.5 years of therapy that I've been engaged in. It's a specific type of therapy. It's been very, very healing for me. And I think it would be interesting for other people who are in therapy to sort of walk with me through this path that I have walked, and, you know, take them through what I've discovered as I've walked that path and how it's unfolded as I walked it. So that's my newest project. It's very personal, perhaps more personal than the Gathering Girl memoir, because we're actually going to be going into, like, my mind and deepest thoughts, and dealing a lot with, the traumas, the complex trauma, the childhood stuff, the first marriage stuff, the stuff that just doesn't go away just because we're like, oh, well, we're 51 now, we shouldn't be bothered by that. Well, guess what? That stuff just tends to linger if you don't deal with it. So that's the next book project. Yeah, right now.
You're very brave to delve into your own psyche. So many of us are like onions, and peeling back those little layers, can be excruciating sometimes. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so that's great. And I love that both of your books are in the same vein and can be directed toward, the same audience.
Yeah, because, if people, I mean, because, if you live, you're going to experience trauma in just the root meaning of the word. You're going to be wounded. If you live a life, you will be wounded in some way along the lines. And so if my experience can help other people on their own path of healing, because I know how much I've been helped by reading the accounts of others. And, that's how we reach out to each other. So hopefully, yeah, the next book, I'm hoping it won't take me, 6 years to write it. Although I joke that The Gathering Girl, I've really been writing since I was about 15 in one way or the other.
That's what writing the first book did for me. It made me a quicker writer. So the second book came much more quickly. I think you'll find that, and especially if it's totally your story and delving into your own issues, that will come more quickly onto the page.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so.
And I know that both of your books will be great discussions for book clubs. I love to zoom in all around the country into a book club and be in their living room, and they'll read something in my book, and I never would have even considered that they would think that about it. So it's
Yeah.
very interesting to hear other people's perspectives on your writing.
Yeah. If I could do more of one thing with The Gathering Girl, it would be to do lots of book clubs, because I actually only did one, but it was so great. They had me there and they cooked me dinner and had fancy cupcakes, and I just felt like a rock star. And everyone just shared their favorite passages, and to see people open the book and see things underlined and highlighted. I mean, as nerd that I am, I mean, that just is just the ultimate. Yeah.
It
So
really
great.
is. It's so wonderful because all of us think of authors as rock stars.
Yeah.
And so many of us have been in book clubs for years and we've never had an author visit. So when one comes into our midst, it is just so wonderful to be able to question them and have a great discussion. And every library has book clubs. So you just need to book you some times with those book clubs in the libraries.
I do. I just need to get more of that energy back is what I need to do.
It
But
is
I trust that will
exhausting.
come.
It's
It is.
exhausting.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about the passage you've brought to share today and then read so we can hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay. So I'm going to read, it's from near the end of the book. The last third of the book are chapters about my mother's death and my father's death, respectively. So this is a little passage from the chapter about my mother's death. And I guess all you need to know as backstory is that when I was 9, she had what we call the nervous breakdown, was eventually diagnosed with schizophrenia. She also had severe depression, severe anxiety. And it was from that time, from the age that I was 9, that my mother became, in my mind, this sort of ghostly figure, this person who had disappeared, but she was still there. And so much of the book, or one of the threads of the book, is me trying to get to my mother. Like, who was she, especially before she became ill? Like, I don't remember her very much. And so it's me sort of trying to find this ghost who's just been haunting my life, for all these years. So that's what this is from. Oddly, what would benefit me most was my mother's autopsy report. I studied it looking for what I missed, what I failed to see, what I refused to see. The details of the report comforted me. Everything was so black and white, so precise. Her heart, for example, weighed 560 grams. Her liver, 2,980 grams. Her right and left lungs, 580 and 540 respectively. Her brain, 1,280. I wished I could have held her heart in my hands, felt the weight of it, or the lightness of it. It was half the weight of her brain, a sixth of her liver. That surprised me. I'd always imagined hearts being heavy, especially hers. The report spoke of ventricular hypertrophy, maximum focal stenosis, smooth and glistening pleural surfaces. It told me the color and size of her gallstones. It told me that her left ovary and appendix were absent. It told me her bony structures demonstrated their usual relationships. It told me she was 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 290 pounds, that she appeared older than her reported age of 52 years, that she died wearing a purple nightgown with a floral print, her natural teeth in good repair. A small amount of black ink was present over her ventral fingertips. Over her right cheek was a raised light brown mole, and over her left upper chest, a tattoo depicting a rose. The report told me in complicated language that she died of heart trouble. There's no mention of depression or loneliness, bitterness or regret, but I knew she died of those too. The report told me she died alone on her couch on a Tuesday at 6:09 in the morning with no evidence of suicide or homicide. It told me her death was natural. Above all, the report told me this: my mother was not a ghost. She was flesh and blood, liver and brain, heart and bone.
Oh, Amanda, that's so poignant. I think it's more poignant than descriptions about emotions or how you felt or anything. You were so analytical, in reading those statistics. I think that makes it even more poignant.
Thank you.
Was there anything that you felt you had to edit out of the book that you just couldn't put into the book?
Originally, in the thesis version, I had more of my sister. My sister was more present, and I had imagined more of her story, her perspective. But after realizing how upsetting the thesis version was, I just backed off. And while she's in there, she's more a character that I ask questions of in the now. Like, hey, do you remember, was I right about this? Did this really happen? And I was just very careful not to do much with trying to imagine her perspective, just out of courtesy, for her emotions and her privacy. So that was probably the biggest thing. Other than that, I just spill all kinds of secrets, because why not? Secrets make us sick.
Exactly so. And I have had the same conversations with my siblings. And, we've all squashed so many things down inside of us. And we don't want to discuss those, because then it would tell us that what we have believed, those one-dimensional facts that you talk about, are not true, that they're much deeper than that and much more involved and complicated. And my mother had so many of the same issues as your mother. So I know exactly where you're coming from. I feel like we're sisters in that aspect.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful. Yeah.
Well, this has been such a great visit with you here today, and you've written such an important book for others. And now our final interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
I think it's simply to just keep writing. I wish I had something more profound than that. But, it seems like the urge to write, at least for me, I remember it being so strong when I was like in my 20s and 30s. And I thought, oh, I've got something to say, and I want to say it. But as we get older, hopefully wiser, more mature, more able to see things in this sort of nuanced, complicated, messy way, that we really have something to say, But so many people, at least for me, I'm like, well, maybe I don't. Maybe I just think I do. No, I think the world needs everybody's perspective. And if you feel that you must write, you just keep writing. Yeah. Until you can't write anymore. So just keep at it.
That's wise advice today. Even if we're writing fiction, so many of our own stories and thoughts and emotions are poured out onto the paper and do become our therapy and healing for all of us. And I don't think we can get too old to not need that. So let's continue to do that and to be there for each other and to share our stories, because that's what we have that will outlive us.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much for being with me here today. And we're excited to now count you among our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julie. I consider it a great honor and a perk of being over 50. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.